Today's lesson is the halo effect, why first impressions can be misleading. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike.
I'm Roger.
And we're back here today with another very interesting article about a term I've heard before, but I would struggle a little to describe exactly what it is. The halo effect. A halo is sort of that golden circle that you often see in pictures depicting holy people, saints, generally from the Christian religion. Angels might have halos. And of course, when you go to an old church and they have depictions of Jesus or saints or other, important people in the religion, that halo, that sort of golden circle that seems to sort of hang or hover above their head, it kind of shows how holy they are, how pure they are, how close to God they are. So when we talk about the halo effect, imagine you have a friend and you think they can do no wrong. They're a wonderful person. They've always been nice to you. And then maybe you discover that, did they lie to me? Did they betray me? Have they done something to hurt me? And you struggle to sort of believe that this person could do something like that. So you might sort of look past the faults or the misbehaviors of certain people when in your mind, in your judgment of them, they are too good to do that kind of thing. So that's kind of the halo effect. Notice how, when celebrities get in trouble, their supporters rush to their defense, even if there is actual proof that they did something wrong. No, we can't accept that this wonderful person that we love so much could do something so evil or so bad or so misbehave in this way. That might be kind of like the halo effect, thinking someone is so wonderful even when maybe they aren't.
Yeah, maybe they're rotten to the core, but I guess you got to stick around and find out what kind of person they are. But today we're going to talk about the halo effect, why first impressions can be misleading. Let's find out what this is all about. Let's listen to the first part right now.
The halo effect, why first impressions can be misleading. Imagine you meet a new classmate, Wendy, who's always dressed stylishly and smiles confidently. You instantly think she's smart, kind, and popular. This is an example of the halo effect. One positive trait, like Wendy's appearance, makes you assume she's great in other ways too. Discovered by psychologist Edward Thorndike in 1920, the halo effect is one reason why first impressions aren't always correct.
大家好，标题中介绍名词 impression， 它的意思是印象或是感想。例如 During a job interview, it's important to make a good impression. 在工作面谈中留下好印象是很重要的。或者 My first impression of Judy was that she was a confident and capable person. 我对 Judy 的第一印象是她是个有自信和有能力的人。再来看到动词 mislead， 表示误导或是使产生错误想法。在标题中 misleading 为现在分词做形容词用。例如 The company was fined for airing misleading advertisements. 该公司因播放误导人的广告被罚款。或是 The article's headline is misleading. It has little to do with the actual content. 这篇文章的标题让人误解，它跟文章的实际内容几乎没有关联。下一个看到 stylishly，它是副词，它的意思是时尚的或是格调优雅的。例如 Even their dog is dressed stylishly in designer outfits. 连他们的狗都穿着设计师的时尚服装。也可以说 The living room was stylishly furnished with sleek furniture and bold colors. 客厅以简约家具和鲜明色彩格调优雅的布置。继续介绍名词 psychologist， 表示心理学家。可以说Simone decided to visit a psychologist to better understand her feelings. Simone 决定去找心理学家，以便更了解自己的情绪。又或者说 Victor is a psychologist who is researching human emotions. Victor 是个研究人类情感的心理学家。
Okay, so again, the title is The Halo Effect. why first impressions can be misleading. Okay, so an impression, of course, is a general feeling you have about something or someone when you first meet the person or when you first see the thing. Your first impressions, like when I first came to Taiwan, my first impressions were that it was quite hot, that it was quite crowded, the traffic was crazy. Those are my first impressions. That's the way, of course, a person from the countryside would feel in a big city like Taipei. Those are my first impressions, the kind of feeling I had when I first came here. And, of course, first impressions here is referring to the kind of feeling you get from a person when you first meet them. Oh, gee, Mike seems like a really nice guy. But Joe over here, well, I'm not going to say what kind of person he is, but he gave me a bad first impression. I don't want to be friends with him.
Well, I won't tell Joe what you said about him. All right, so yes, we're going to be finding out about how this halo effect and first impressions can be misleading. If something is misleading, it's not necessarily a lie, but it's giving you a wrong impression of something, or it's giving you incorrect information that might make you go off and have incorrect judgments or incorrect opinions or something like that. Politicians can be very good at being misleading. They can say something that they claim to be true, and then when they're challenged on it later, they can say, well, I didn't mean to say that, even though that's exactly what I said. But they're misleading you. They're kind of tricking you, maybe just because they don't have all the right information at that time, or maybe because they want you to believe something that is slightly different from the actual truth. So yeah, when you meet someone for the first time, you might think, wow, they're tall, they're handsome, they're good looking, she's so beautiful, they seem so wonderful, and that can make people have other judgments about other aspects of that person's personality or their behavior that may not be entirely accurate or fair. So let's find out all about this with our first paragraph.
Okay, so in the first paragraph here, we're meeting Wendy. We're not really meeting Wendy. We're imagining that we're meeting a girl named Wendy. She's a new classmate. Again, her name is Wendy. And she's always dressed stylishly and smiles confidently. Okay, so if you're stylish, that means you wear modern clothes, and they'll probably be kind of expensive. You're not wearing clothes that you bought in the night market, okay? It's not like a shirt you bought for 100 NT or whatever. You paid some money for these clothes, and so she's dressed stylishly. She has her makeup on perfectly. She has some earrings and other kinds of accessories. So she's dressed stylishly. We could say she's quite chic. And she also has a confident smile, okay? She's not sneering. She's very proud of herself. She's very comfortable with herself. She's very confident, so she smiles confidently. And if you meet someone like that, you might think, that's the kind of person I want to be friends with.
There you go. You instantly think she's smart, kind, and popular. She's stylish. She smiles. She seems very friendly. She's well put together, right? She dresses well. She's not sloppy or anything like that. So you might think good things about that person because physically in front of you and the way they behave, they seem good and nice and very professional. So you think she's smart, she's kind, she's popular. And it says this is an example of the halo effect. One positive trait, like Wendy's appearance, makes you assume she's great in other ways too. So, our brains are good at sort of putting things together, but sometimes they put things together based on past experiences or based on what we're led to believe, what we think is normal. So suddenly, for you, Wendy is wonderful in all sorts of ways because she has nice shoes, clean clothes, and she seems very nice and looks you in the eye when she talks to you. So, of course, she couldn't lie to you. Of course, she must be really intelligent. All of these other positive things get attached to those few positive things that you've actually experienced in real life yourself, but you're kind of maybe giving too much credit based on too little evidence. Discovered by psychologist Edward Thorndike in 1920, the halo effect is one reason why first impressions aren't always correct. All right, so this halo effect was actually a term coined way back in 1920 by a psychologist, Edward Thorndike. And well, a psychologist is the kind of person who would know all about this stuff because a psychologist is a person who studies human behavior. They're an expert or specialist in psychology, which is the study of understanding how people behave, their feelings, their moods, their behavior, that kind of thing. So the halo effect, it says, is one reason why first impressions aren't always correct. There is actually a famous saying that we have, you often say this to people when they're going on a first date or going for a job interview. You only have one chance to make a first impression. In other words, if you don't impress someone that first time, they're going to have a negative opinion of you forever. Well, this is kind of the flip side to that. It says that even though you do make a good first impression, that doesn't mean that you should always believe it. So first impressions aren't always correct, especially somewhere like a job interview or a first date where people are generally on their best behavior. They're dressed as well as they possibly can be. They're being very aware of their behavior, what they do, how they look, how they talk, all that kind of stuff. But that might not be the real them, so we shouldn't put too much weight on first impressions, nor should we put too much weight on bad first impressions. Good or bad, they may not be that real person as you would see them in normal life, as opposed to a time when they're trying to impress you, like on a first date or a job interview. All right, so let's go on to the second paragraph in our article. In Thorndike's experiment, military officers rated soldiers on traits like leadership, intelligence, and appearance. If a soldier was good or bad at one thing, officers often believed they were good or bad at everything. Additionally, once the officers formed an opinion, they were unlikely to change their minds.
第二部分看到名词 intelligence， 它的意思是智力或是智慧。例如 Your test results show that you are someone with high intelligence. 你的测验结果显示你智力很高。再看一个例子 I don't doubt Debbie's intelligence. I've always known she's smart. 我不怀疑 Debbie 的智力，我一直都知道她很聪明。
Okay, so remember we're talking about a psychologist by the name of Edward Thorndike. He was the person who discovered the halo effect way back in 1920, over 100 years ago. And in Thorndike's experiment, military officers rated soldiers on traits like leadership, intelligence, and appearance. Okay, so if you're a scientist and you have some sort of theory, you of course will conduct a survey or an experiment to kind of prove your point. So he conducted an experiment here, and in this experiment, he had military officers rate soldiers on various traits or characteristics, and those traits or characteristics included leadership, intelligence, and appearance. So we had these military officers, a lieutenant, a captain, a major, a colonel, or whatever. They were observing soldiers, and they were kind of rating them in terms of these three qualities. Leadership, were they good leaders? Okay, were they able to be responsible for other soldiers below them? Were they smart? Did they have intelligence? And did they look good? Did they have really nice uniforms, or were they all kind of wrinkly and dirty and stuff like that? So yes, they rated these soldiers based on those three criteria.
All right, and here's what happened. It says if a soldier was good or bad at one thing, so if their leadership scores were low or their appearance wasn't very good, their boots weren't shined and their uniform was a little messy and not nicely pressed or something. So if the soldier was really good, if they looked great or seemed smart at one thing or bad at one thing, officers often believed they were good or bad at everything. So just because you had muddy boots and your uniform was a little bit not tucked in, they might think, well, they're probably not very smart as well, and they're probably terrible leaders on top of that. So they would take one quality and sort of use that score as a basis for all the other qualities, despite there's no evidence that their low score in one category equals low scores in the other categories. You can have people who dress very sloppily who could still be very good leaders or could still be very intelligent. Additionally, once the officers formed an opinion, they were unlikely to change their minds. That's very interesting, too. So even if that sloppy soldier turned out to be quite smart or could actually be a good leader in combat or something like that, the officers who first judged them would never give them credit for their good performance in other categories. Their minds had been made up, and changing their minds proved to be very, very difficult.
Kind of sounds like my mother when we went for a hike when I was a kid. I slipped on some rocks and kind of fell into the water. And after that, my mother always believed that I was really clumsy and would always fall down, even though that was the only time I ever fell down in front of her. But that's what happens. They get that first impression, and that's what happened to these military officers in Edward Thorndike's experiment. Okay, let's move on now to the third and final part of our lesson for today, and we'll talk about why this happens.
Why does this happen? One explanation is that our brains have evolved for efficiency. When we meet someone, we rely on quick impressions to fill in the blanks. However, this inclination can lead to errors in judgment. For example, studies show that attractive people are often seen as more capable, even if their work is average. Another explanation is that our brains generally favor consistency. When we notice one good quality in someone, we tend to assume the rest of their traits match.
第三部分介绍单字 explanation， 这个名词指的是解释或是说明。举例来说 ，This book provides an extremely detailed explanation of how the human brain works. 这本书提供了极其详尽的解释，说明人类大脑的运作方式。或是 I listened to the teacher's explanation of the problem, but I still couldn't understand it. 我听了老师对问题的解释，但还是听不懂。下一个看到名词 efficiency， 表示效率、效能或是功效。例如 Gina's efficiency in handling her work duties impressed the manager. Gina 处理工作事务的效率让经理印象深刻。也可以说A dishwasher increases cleaning efficiency by washing many dishes at once. 洗碗机透过一次清洗多个碗盘来提高清洗效率。最后看到 inclination， 这个名词表示倾向或是爱好。可以说 Susan has a strong inclination toward learning new languages. Susan 对学习新语言有强烈的倾向。最后一个例子 Andy's inclination to help others made him a beloved teacher.Andy 乐于助人的倾向，让他成为受欢迎的老师。
Okay, so here in the third part, we're talking about why this happens. Why does this happen? Well, I don't know how this happens. Let's find out. One explanation is that our brains have evolved for efficiency. So this is one possible explanation. We've observed the phenomenon. Okay, we know it's happening here, but why does it happen? So we've got an explanation here. That's just a way to figure out why something happens. You know, I don't understand how that happens. What's your explanation? Or you were late for school today. What's your explanation? Why were you late? Oh, I got up late, or I'm kind of sick, or I missed the bus, or whatever. That's my explanation, or that's my excuse. So one explanation is our brains have evolved through evolution for efficiency. Efficiency just talks about how efficient something is, how well it uses resources, and how well it doesn't waste things.
All right, so our minds are working on making quick decisions in order to understand things as quickly as possible. Or as it says, when we meet someone, we rely on quick impressions to fill in the blanks. So this is a person you've never met before. You have no idea who they are, what their background is, anything about their personality. But you can't really, spend an hour talking to the person, reading their resume, quizzing them on the type of person, giving them personality tests or something like that. You can't really do that. So we we depend on as humans, right, to sort of move through our day and deal with different people that we meet. We depend on these quick impressions, quick judgments based on very little information, and we use those to fill in the blanks. I mean, how many people have said, oh, look, that guy's got tattoos. He must love heavy metal music and motorcycles. He's probably not a rich guy, probably not a bank manager or something like that, because that might be the experience you've had in the past or what you've learned through culture. But you never know. That person could be the head of a CEO of a big company, or they could have gone to Harvard and graduated with their top marks, and they just happen to like tattoos. So we fill in blanks, right? We kind of make quick judgments about people based on little information, because that's how we go through our lives. And as I said, we can't really do a deep dive into a person's background and their personality every time we meet someone. someone new. However, it says this inclination, this habit, this reliance on these quick impressions can lead to errors in judgment. An inclination is sort of a way you generally do things. If you talk about your habits, these are your inclinations. I like to wake up early in the morning, even on the weekends. I'm a night owl. I'm the person who likes to read books and listen to music as opposed to go out with my friends and things. These, generally the things that I like, the things that make me happy. These are your inclinations. But these inclinations, these habits that we have, can lead to errors in judgment. They can lead us to judging people incorrectly. And even when we're shown how incorrect our judgment is, as proven by these research with the officers, it can be very hard to change our minds.
Indeed, especially if somebody judges you from the first impression and you want to tell them that, hey, I'm not so bad after all. They probably just won't believe it because they had that first impression. They had that inclination, and now they've got errors in judgment. Let's give you an example here. For example, studies show, or research shows, that attractive people are often seen as more capable even if their work is average. Okay, so that's probably why there's so much emphasis on looking good. Everybody is very concerned about being attractive, physically attractive. Both men and women want to look their best. They want to look highly spiffy. They want to dress really chicly. They want to give a great impression by looking very stylish. And yes, that's because they are seen as more capable. If you're good looking, hey, you're more capable. You're able to do things. Even if we look at your work performance and find out your work performance is pretty average or mediocre, we still think you're better than everybody else simply because you are more attractive.
Another explanation is that our brains generally favor consistency. Our brains like things to be nice and neat. We often say, don't put everyone in a box because people are different, but our brain likes to put things in boxes. Otherwise, the world is a confusing place and people can be very different, and that can just make things hard for us to make quick judgments on. So consistency is things kind of being the same all the time. We like to kind of put these people in categories or in boxes. But of course, as we really know, if you think about the people that you know very well, everyone is different, everyone is unique, and everyone can be quite complicated. But our brains don't always work that way, especially with people that we're meeting for the first time. It says when we notice one good quality in someone, we tend to assume the rest of their traits match. If they're tall, if they're good looking, if they're well dressed, we must imagine that they're smart as well, they're successful, they're honest, all that kind of thing, because, it's confusing when you meet someone who seems so nice, but their personality turns out to be not so nice.
Exactly. So we just assume they're going to be really great people. Instead, they might turn out to be a real low-life character. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Here comes Hanny, who is anything but a low-life character.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny， 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分最后一句写到 Discovered by psychologist Edward Thorndike in 1920, the halo effect is one reason why first impressions aren't always correct. 光环效应是由心理学家爱德华·桑代克于1920年发现的，它是第一印象并非总是准确的原因之一。那这个句子的开头是 discovered， 是过去分词，而句子里面并没有连接词，我们就可以判断它使用了分词构句。那这边就来介绍分词构句的用法。以对等连接词 and 去连接主词相同的两个子句时，我们可以省略其中一个主词以及省略连接词，然后把动词改成分词。主动的话是改成现在分词 VING， 被动的话是把 be 动词改成 being， 然后再进一步省略，只留下了过去分词 PP。像课文句子原本可以写作 The halo effect was discovered by ... And the halo effect is ... 前后主词相同，我们省略了连接词 and， 然后把前半句的主词省略。动词的部分 was discovered 是被动，那现在把 was 改成 being， 再进一步省略，只留下过去分词 discovered， 那就变成课文句子了。好，我们也来造个例句。Located in the north of Taiwan, Beito is famous for its hot springs. 北投位于北台湾，以温泉闻名。 那这个例句就是省略了连接词 and， 那么前半句以分词 located 开头，它就是由北投 is located 简化而来。好，有一个延伸学习是，如果两个子句是用从属连接词来连接，可能像 when, while, after, before 等等，我们在改成分词构句时，可以保留连接词，让句意更清楚。例如 Eric moved out after graduating from college。Eric 大学毕业后就搬出去了。那句中的 after graduating 就是由 after he graduated 简化而来。那这边有保留连接词 after， 没有省略掉。课文第3部分提到一种解释是，我们的大脑是为了效率而演化的。那当我们遇到某人时 ，we rely on quick impressions to fill in the blanks。我们常靠快速的第一印象来填补对其不了解的部分。Fill in the blanks 字面意思是填空，那在这边就是指自行填补推测未知的资讯。好，我们另外是要介绍片语动词 rely on 或者是 rely upon， 可以表达依靠、依赖、凭借、仰赖等等的语义。那么后面可以接人或事物当受词，例如 Many people rely on their phones for everyday tasks。许多人仰赖手机处理日常事务。那再看一个例句是Richard is someone you can rely on. Richard 是个可以信赖依靠的人。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Impression. Cole gave the impression of being confident, but he was actually quite nervous. Mislead. What Rita told us was misleading, even though she didn't lie directly. Psychologist. A psychologist studies how people think, feel, and behave in different situations and environments. Intelligence. Intelligence isn't only about getting good grades, but also about understanding people and emotions. Explanation. Can you give me an explanation for your absence from school last Friday? Efficiency. The engineer made a few adjustments to the machine to increase its efficiency.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.